Shalom.
Shalom. And we're continuing with Sefer Shemot, with verses about Moshe and how his personal story, his family story, is the story of Am Yisrael, before we turn into a nation. I'm going to share the news sources that I've sent you today. Okay, so last week we finished Perik Gimel, with Moshe, God turning to Moshe and telling him, his name. We spoke a lot about the name, Heyeh Asher Eyeh. What does that mean? And Moshe is saying, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. They're not going to believe me. Why would Paro listen to me? Why would Bnei Israel listen to me? And Perek Dalet continues that with after God is giving a very thorough answer to Moshe, telling him that everything will be okay, and he should tell them that the God of their forefathers send him to redeem them. And even after all that long and very persuasive um, um, speech from God, Moshe is not convinced. And chapter 4 starts with Moshe saying, "But Moshe spoke up and said, 'What if they do not believe me and do not listen to me, but say, God did not appear to you?'" Okay, here that's a great question. That's a great point. After everything that God told Moshe, you should go to them and you should tell them, the God of Abraham, the God of Yitzchak, the God of Yaakov, send me to you, and I'm here to redeem you. God listened to your calling, to your crying. And first he wanted to know his name, the God's name, but then after God is giving him all this speech, Moshe is saying something very simple. What if they are not going to believe me? What if they'll tell me you're making all up? Now, why wouldn't he make everything up? Why would they believe him that he, after spending, so much time, tens of years, in the desert in Midian, comes back and say, God revealed himself to me? Why would they listen to me? Now, what I'm trying to do, and I hope you can already do it yourself. We're reading this about Moshe, but we are turning from a family to a nation, and we should also hear Am Yisrael here. And what Moshe is saying, they're not going to believe me. They're not going to listen to me. They're going to tell me God didn't appear to you. And all of that is really indeed, I would say, the characteristic of the people of Israel throughout the desert. Even when they see things in front of their faces, sometimes they say, is it so? Is it really? Should we do that? Should we believe you? And I think that the doubt, or should I say, the questioning of Am Yisrael is something very, very typical. But we can look at it on the negative side, saying, oh, everything, they doubt everything, and they don't have belief, they don't trust. But in the other hand, what Moshe is doing here towards God in their dialogue is what the people of Israel and what we are going to do throughout our Jewish history. One of the main, I would call it tool for being Jewish is to ask questions, never to take anything for granted. And what Moshe is doing here is like he's asking, but he's just a sample for what the people of Israel will do. They'll accept the Torah. They will be witnessing God, revealing himself on Mount Sinai, giving the Torah, and still they'll have questions. Why? Because it goes back all the way back to Avraham Avinu. It's about asking questions. It's about searching. It's about not taking anything for granted. It's about making sure that I'm in the right place, that I'm thinking the right thing. If we don't have questions, we stop being. If we don't have questions, then people can just tell us anything, and we'll be just like, changing our minds every 2 minutes. The questioning is a process of deepening our identity. The questioning is a process of finding the truth. That's one side of it. The other side of it, which God will teach Moshe through that conversation, is asking questions is great. Even having doubt is good. Wanting to make sure that you understand what you've been told is good. But the other side of it is accepting that there are no answers for every question. And I think that's maybe the hardest challenge that we face as a nation, as a people, as a belief. If we manage to accept that we are not going to get answers for all our questions, but yet we are going to continue to ask questions, then we're in the right place. Because there are no answers for everything. And some answers are beyond our ability to comprehend, to understand. And some questions have few answers. And then we have to again to process our choice, our bechira chofshit, what to choose from the options. Okay? And everything is like in little microcosmos here between Moses and God. Okay. So Moses is telling God, they're not going to listen to me. They're going to tell me, why would we believe you that God appeared to you? Who are you that God appeared to you? So God told him, and so God said to him, what is that in your hand? And he replied, a rod. Now, it's such a weird answer, right? Because Moshe is asking this really big, good question, and God is asking him, what are you holding in your hand? And even before we continue to what is God looking to do with that, maybe what God is telling Moshe, that sometimes we run into searching in faraway places, but the answer is in our hand. The answer is right there. For big question doesn't always have to have big answers. Sometimes it's a very simple answer, but it's about paying attention. Like Moshe paid attention to the burning bush and found his route in life and his destiny in life. That's the same thing. You don't have to look far. Tell me what's in your hand. Let's try to make what you have already into the solution. Okay, that's in a general way. Let's continue to see what does God mean by that, by having the rod. Okay, so God is asking him, what do you have in your hand? And Moshe is telling him, I have the mateh. He has the rod. And God is telling Moshe, cast it on the ground. He cast it on the ground, and it became a snake. And Moshe recoiled from it. It's very peculiar. What's going on? Moshe is telling God, how can they trust me? And God is telling him, listen, take the mateh that you have, the staff that you have in your hand, and throw it on the ground. And Moshe is doing exactly what God told him to do. And it turned into a snake, and Moshe ran away. Now, why a snake, right? It could be anything. Why a snake? So pshat can be, okay, we're in the desert after all, and there are snakes in the desert. That's why, that's a very common creature in the desert. The other answer could be that what's similar to a long stick, to a rod, a snake. So it's the same shape, that just turned alive. But because we know we're dealing with Torah, because we know we're dealing with with a holy language, and words specifically in Chamisha Chumshei Torah, in the Pentateuch, the words there are some words that are code words. And when I find a snake, I immediately run into the snake of Bereshit. because a snake is not a neutral element. A snake is an element of seduction. The snake is an element of wanting to make people fail and make people disbelieve in God. This is what we have from the snake in Bereshit, in Genesis. So what God is telling Moshe, what you have in your hand can either be a staff or a snake. And if it's a snake, it's really scary. Moshe, Vayanos Moshe mipanav, Moshe runs away from it, he recoils from it. Okay, which is an instinct. It's the right instinct from a snake, especially in the desert. What does the Torah want to tell us here? Okay, so maybe the simplest thing is that sometimes what we have in our hand can either be the tool, for a good thing or a tool for a bad thing, but it depends how we use it. So we take a very, a very natural thing like a stick or a staff, and all of a sudden it turns into an enemy or a danger. Okay, and then God tells Moshe, then God told Moshe, put out your hand and grasp it by the tail. And he put out his hand and seized it, and it became a rod in his hand. What is this? Okay, it's a miracle. Okay, we understand. It's a miracle. God can make miracles. But that's not the reason, in order to tell us that, we don't need that in order to know that God is doing miracles. But there's something that he has to teach Moshe. And through Moshe, it's a lesson that the entire people, Jewish people, the Israelites will have to learn later on in the desert. Okay, and in actually psychologically, this piece of story makes so much sense, because what God is telling Moshe, that thing that you ran away from, that you're afraid of, you have to deal with it. You have to face it, or you have to grasp it. You have to overcome your fear. So he asks Moshe to hold the snake in its tail. And Moshe does exactly what God tells him. And when he holds the tail, all of a sudden it becomes a rod again. Okay. In other words, there's a process here of few things, I believe. One is the answer for what Moshe asked about. They're not going to believe me. Why would they believe me? Is God is telling him it's in your hand. Now it's in his hand literally, but it's in his hand. It's how you're going to put it. It's how you're going to present yourself to the people. If you'll be sure in what you're doing and what you're saying, they'll feel it and they believe you. Again, the same thing when we turn into a nation. Whenever we apologize for who we are, then we'll have to run away from our identity and from the other nations. And when we know who we are, if there's some strength in us, then those kind of questions are not going to scare us. And the other part of what God is doing here with Moshe is like, in order to face something, in order to face our fears, I'll say it differently. In order to overcome our fears, we have to face them. And it becomes such a crucial learning for Am Yisrael, because we are going to encounter so many scary steps in our way. If we run away from the fear, it's just going to chase us. But if we stand still and grab it by the tail, then it becomes something that we can deal with. And I just want to say that psychologically, it's so built in theories of how to overcome fear and anxiety, just to face it, to deal with it, so and the other thing that God is doing here, and as I said before, is is telling it's in your hand. Now, there's a very famous story. I'm sure some of you heard the story. There's a story, some tell it about a wise old rabbi, and some tell the story about a wise old Buddha monk. It doesn't matter. Just a very smart, an old and smart person who comes to a village, and everyone knows that this person, he can solve any riddle. And there's a smart boy or a smart girl, doesn't matter. Let's make him a girl. There's a smart girl who say, I'm gonna trick that wise man. I'm gonna catch a butterfly, and I'm gonna ask the wise man, what do I have in my hand? And obviously he's going to say a butterfly because he knows things. And then I'll ask him, is the butterfly dead or alive? If he'll say he's dead, I will open my hands and the butterfly will fly. And if he'll say the butterfly is alive, I'll I'll squish my hands and I'll kill the butterfly, and I'll show him that the butterfly is dead. So comes the wise man to the village, and the little girl is catching a butterfly, and she comes in front of the wise man and she says, what do I have in my hand? And he tells her, you have a butterfly. And she asks him, is it dead or alive? And the wise man looks her in the eyes and he tells her, that, my dear, is in your hands. If you wish, he will live. If you wish, he will die. And I really feel that this is what God is doing here to Moshe. You should know that you, as a human being that was created in the image of God, have a lot of power, a lot of abilities. Don't let your fears overcome what you can do as a person. Yes, you can go down there and you can persuade them that God sent, that I sent you, and you can face God, and it's okay, and you can do it. And so when God is telling Moshe, hold the tail, and Moshe is doing as God ordered him to do, and the rod and it became a rod in his hands. And God is saying, you see that they may believe that God, the God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Yitzchak, the God of Yaakov, did appear to you. Okay, at the bottom line says God, and if you'll talk to them and they're not going to believe you, so do them the little trick with a snake, and then they'll believe you that you can, that God helps you to do a miracle. Now, there's something very interesting happening between verse 5, Pasuk Hey, and Pasuk Vav in verse 6. Because here, God is telling Moshe, and you should do the trick with a rod in front of them, and they'll believe you. And here, right here, after that verse, there should have been the answers of Moshe. Moshe would say, okay, I'll do it, or thank you for your solution, or something like that. But instead of an answer from Moshe, God is speaking more. Vayomer Hashem lo od. Yeah? And God said to him further. Now, what does that mean that God spoke to him further? God had another thing to tell him. It means, and I'm using the teaching of one of the greatest Talmidot Chachamot, learned women in Israel, Professor Nechama Leibovich, Zichrona Livracha, was the big Tanakh teacher in Medinat Israel. She passed away about 25 years ago, I believe. And she said every time there's a conversation in the Bible and one is saying something and we expect the other one to answer, and there's no answer, that means that there's a silence. The other part, whose turn is to talk, don't know what to say. Either they're speechless, or they're shocked, or they're disappointed, or anything, but they can't find the words to answer. And I look at this and I say, yes, God is telling Moshe, do the trick with a stick, do the trick with a staff to the people of Israel. But Moshe is shocked. Moshe is like, really? You think that will work? And when God understands that Moshe is not convinced by by the trick with the staff and the snake. So God is saying something else. So God said to him further, put your hand into your bosom. And he put his hand into the bosom. And when he took it out, his hand was encrusted with snowy scales. Okay, tzaraat. Now, and then God told him, Vayomer Hashev yadcha el chekecha, put your hand back into your bosom, and he put his hand back, and when he took it out, there it was again like the rest of his body. Again, Hashev yadcha. In other words, God is giving him another trick, another miracle, we can call it, with a hand. Now it's not something external to Moshe. It's not a rod. It's not a rod. It's not a staff. It's his hand. Again, the message of like it's in your hand. You have it with you. You want to use it as a miracle? Okay, fine. Put it in, put it out, and maybe that will convince them. But again, what I feel here is that God telling Moshe, you don't need to search so far in order to understand that you can do that task. You have it with you, and it's in your hands. And again, when I'm trying to think about what's foreshadow this story is telling us about the people of Israel, and that might be one of the most unexplained phenomena in Jewish history, that when we had miracles happening in front of our eyes, like what Moshe is doing, like what God will do on Mount Sinai and throughout their way 40 years in the desert, and also when they enter the land, and there'll be all kind of miracles, the people of Israel did not follow the word of God completely. They always had this dance with idol worshiping throughout, the desert and the time in Israel. It took hundreds of years till they stopped with idol worshiping. And it's really mind-blowing, right? They had miracles in front of their eyes. Look at what God is telling Moshe. He's turning a staff into a snake. He's putting in and out his hand, and it's clean, and then it's full of scales. But it's not enough. It was never enough for the people of Israel when they had miracles in front of their eyes. But when we went out to exile after the second destruction, after the destruction of the second temple, and we were out there in exile, there were no prophets, there were no big miracles, and surprisingly enough, the people of Israel stuck to their religion and to their identity for at least 2,000 years, or maybe till 250 years ago, with emancipation and enlightenment, and when secularism came to the world, and science, and we all know the story. But how come we kept our religion, we kept our faith without miracles? No questioning, just continue and passing it on from family to family, from generation to generation. But when we did have the miracles in front of our eyes, it was we were still confused of whether we should do it or not. Just something to think about, okay? But we see it already here with Moshe, with the little miracles that God is giving him. And then he says, and if vehaya, and if they do not believe you or pay heed to the first sign with a snake, they will believe the second. I'm giving you two tools, two tricks. Try the first one. They're not going to believe the first one. Do the second one. Now here again, Moshe should have said, "Okay, thank you. You gave me two things to do. I'll try." But again, there's a quiet, and there's no reply by Moshe. And it seems like God feels like he has to say something else. And it continues, and if they are not convinced by both these signs and still do heed you, take some water from the Nile and pour it in the dry ground, and the water that you take from the Nile, will turn to blood on the dry ground. And the way that the miracles are put in the here in the text is from the simple one, or the the little one, the second one with a scale is more sophisticated or more striking. But the thing with the blood is, what can you say against that? Take the water from the Nile with all what the Nile is symbolizing in Egypt, and then it'll turn into blood on the floor. And here Moshe starts speaking, Vayomer Moshe, and we expect him to say, okay, thank you. You gave me 3 tricks, 3 miracles. Here I come. Instead, Moshe continues to say, but Moses said to God, please, oh my Lord, I have never been a man of words, either in times past or now, that you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. In other words, Moshe is turning to God and he say, look, these all are very nice. You convinced me that you're able to do those things. But what you need is someone that know how to talk. Someone, if we compare it to what's happening in Greece at the 6th and 7th century BCE with creating all the rhetoric way of how to speak and the big orators, and Moshe is telling God, I don't know how to talk. I mean, I know how to talk, but I've never spoken to kings before, and I'm really slow with words and slow with speech and tongue. Now, it's either he's telling him he's stuttering, or he's telling him he's just not good at talking, and convincing. He never been to a debate before, and he doesn't know how to set a point in a thorough way. In other words, Moshe stopped with the reason of saying that they're not going to believe him, because God convinced him that he can do miracles in front of the people's eyes, and they will believe him that God sent him. But in order to fulfill God's mission, he needs to say big words and to convince people, with inspiration and great talk and great spirit. And he's a simple person, he says. I'm a shepherd. I've been here, I've been there. I don't know. And he's really begging, please, oh my Lord, I've never been a man of words, either in times past or now. Now, either in times past or now, and we wonder, what is he talking about? What are the past that we know of Moshe? We know of his past as a baby who was crying in the basket, and then we know what he did after he came out of the palace and he saw the Egyptian hitting a Jew, a Hebrew, and he killed him, and then he ran away. And even with the daughters of Yitro, he never speak. It's just, we don't really hear him talking up till this minute in front of the bush. And he's telling the truth. I've never used words in order to, find my way in the world. And when I think about the people of Israel, like, what does that symbolize in terms of the nation? And he's like, because and here is a little bit of an irony, because what we are known to be is people who can talk. Rabbi Sachs had a great sentence about it. He kept saying that, us Jews, we know how to speak, but we don't know how to listen, because we keep talking and talking. And then he used to say, he said, I'm very lucky because I married a woman that is a great listener, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to, to get along, because she can bear listening to all my babbling and talking, even though what he said was very interesting. But so it's very interesting that the Torah is telling us that the leader that will lead us out of Egypt tells about himself that he doesn't know how to talk so well. And it's very interesting. I think that one major part of the moral directions of Judaism is watch what you're saying. It's true. You can be very learned and have great speeches and give big classes to hundreds of people, but hey, every word counts for something. Watch what you're saying. Make sure you're not saying words that's going to hurt people. Very like all the laws of Lashon Hara and how words can hurt people. So it's very interesting. It's as if Moshe feels that what they need is someone that will teach them how to speak correctly. But in a way, God really wants him because because he cannot talk so well. In other words, God will teach him how to speak, and it will be the same as God will teach the people of Israel how to speak and what to say and what's the right thing to say and what's the wrong thing to say. And for that kind of, let's say, technical uh, um, fault that Moshe feels that he has, God is answering him in a very technical way as well, because he says, you shouldn't have to worry about you being very slow with speech and in tongue, because how give who gives human speech? Who makes them dumb or deaf, seeing or blind? It is not I, God. It's like, why are you worrying about that? I am your creator. I made you. I can put words into your tongue. I know who is deaf and who is blind and who is seeing. If I made you, I can give you that you are lacking. ואתה, לך ואנוכי אהיה עם פיך והוריתיך את אשר תדבר. It's a very strong sentence. Now go and I will be with you as you speak and will instruct you what to say. What can be better than that? I would definitely take that answer. It's like, okay, great. God will tell me what to say. And it's as if God is telling Moshe, all I need you is to stand there. You'll just open your mouth and I'll put words in your mouth. You don't have to worry about it. Okay? But again, on the way, God is teaching us a lesson in faith. It's like the idea, that God is the creator, and God knows us better than we know ourselves. And maybe we should listen to the words of the Torah again, see how it fits in our life. And the next thing is that I am with you. Go, I will be with your mouth. I'm here. If I send you into a mission, you should know I'm there to accompany you, and you should go. Now, what can anyone say after such a promise, such a beautiful promise from God? But Moshe is not convinced. Vayomer bi Adonai shlach na beyat tishlach. But he said, please, oh my Lord, make someone else your agent. Send through whomever you will send. Now this is what we call, can sound like a chutzpah, like, how dare he? But it is coming from a very, very deep feeling of Moshe that this is not something he can do or want to do. But the courage that he has to stand in front of God and to argue with him to the bitterest end of like, I believe you, God, that you will be with my mouth, but I really don't want to do it. Please send someone else. And at that point, God's upset, and God became angry with Moshe and said, there is your brother Aaron the Levite. He, I know, speaks readily. Even now he is setting out to meet you, and he will be happy to see you. But there's a lot of things I wanna say about this pasuk, but first of all let's see that God is upset. God is angry with Moshe. Vayichel af Hashem b'Moshe. Like, what else do you want? But nevertheless, it's one of the, I think there are two places in the Torah that there's anger, but there's no punishment. Usually when there's an anger, when God is angry of a person, of us as a group, there's the punishment follows. But here there's no punishment. You know, he's angry, but he really wants Moshe to do it. So he's giving him another solution. And the solution is, and the solution this time is, okay, I will send someone with you, and that person will be your brother. Aaron Achicha HaLevi, because they're both from the tribe of Levi. Your brother Aaron, I know he can talk. Now, this is very surprising as well. What do you mean, I know he speaks readily? Now, of course, God knows everything, but inside the story, we never heard Aaron speak anything. He was punished because Aaron became a Kohen. Nachon. But right now, I'm just talking about the story here. Nachon is like, um, um, we never heard Aaron talk. We didn't even hear about him. We heard about Miriam, and all of a sudden we hear that he has a brother, an older brother. And it puts what it does to the story, I think, from a high level of, there is a mission to go and redeem the people of Israel, and Moshe can do it, and God is ordering him, and Moshe really insists that he can't do the job, and nothing convinces him, and then God takes out the winning card, your brother, someone you know, someone you trust. You are not going to be alone in this. But there's another thing that he adds. Not only that I know he speaks readily, which tells us that God knew Aaron from before, and then the Midrashim will say that God spoke to Aaron before, but I'll leave it here. Not only that he says that he speaks well, even now he's setting out to meet you, and he will be happy to see you. וגם הנה הוא יוצא לקראתך ורעך ושמח ליבו. He'll be happy to see you. So God is telling Moshe, I already spoke to Aaron, and I told him that you have this mission, and I asked him to come to the desert to meet you in the middle of the way to help you with your mission. But the thing that God adds is that Aaron will be happy to see you. And that is a new, I think like a new realm, a new sphere of relationship between brothers in the Torah. Because all the samples, all the examples, all the relationship between brothers that we met in Sefer Bereshit were disasters. It starts with Cain and Abel, and it continues with Ishmael and Yitzchak, and then Yaakov and Esav, and of course the story with Yosef and his brothers. Even Rachel Leah has some conflict. Brothers never have it right in the book of Bereshit. The maybe the hint for something which is going to change is we hear about the children of Yosef, Menashe and Ephraim, that they're mentioned together and they're blessed together, and we don't hear about any conflict between them. But here, for the first time, the Torah is saying there can be a different way. Brothers don't have to fight and be enemies all the time. Here, Aaron, even though he's the oldest, and Moshe will be the main character in redeeming the people, he's happy to see you. He's happy in your success. He's happy in your mission. He's happy in what God is entitled on you. And the new thing here, again, if we think again about moving from a family to a nation, is that's the secret. Because rivalry between siblings is the worst thing that can happen in humanity everywhere, not just amongst Jews. And then if we know how to live together and be happy for each other as siblings in one family, in one nation, then we can look around us and remember that all nations are, are part of humanity that God was creating. So God is telling him, okay, if you can't trust me, you will trust your brother. And God is telling him the plan. You will speak to him. I'll show you the English. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with you and with him as you speak, and tell both of you what to do. It's like God will talk to Moshe. Moshe will tell Aaron what to say, and Aaron will be the voice to speak to the people and to speak to Pharaoh, and he shall speak for you to the people. Thus he shall serve as your spokesman. It will be very clear who is the first one, who is the most important one. With you playing the role of God to him, okay, of course, God to him, Elohim is the word Elohim here doesn't really mean God, but means an important person. You will be more important than him. The word Elohim in the Tanakh, in the Bible, has few meanings. One, Elohim is God. One, Elohim is important people, sometimes judges, and Elohim can also be a name for angels. Okay, so it depends in what in what sentences does this word appear in order to understand what's the meaning of that word, And God is telling him, you want to run away from the mission, you don't want to do it. You tell me technical reasons why you can't do it, and I solve the technical reason, but you have to be the most important one. You're in charge. You're the head of that mission, and you will also take the rod with you, which you shall perform the signs. I give you otot, I give you signs, I give you little miracles that you will do. And not only that Aaron will solve the technical fact of speech, but you will hold the staff and you'll perform the signs with it. Now, here again is something very surprising, because there's no reaction by Moshe. Moshe have nothing else to say because God gave him all the answers he can have. There's no way to run away from the mission anymore. What is he doing? He's going back to Yitro. And Moshe went back to his father-in-law, Yitro. Now, the shift between standing in front of the burning bush, talking to God, and if you remember last week, I showed you that God keeps appearing to Moshe in his personal name, in Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, in the name of Hashem, and Moshe keeps referring to God in his Elohim, in the big name, not the personal name, but the general name of God. And then then God says, okay, if this is what you call me, fine, I'll be Elohim till you be able to call me Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. But there's no ending. There's no closure in the conversation between God and Moshe. God is telling him, take the staff and you'll do signs in him. Aaron is on his way to see you. And there's no words by Moshe, only actions. Moshe doesn't talk. Vayelech Moshe vayashov el yeter Yitro. Moshe went back to Yitro and he said to him, he has words towards Moshe Yitro. Because Yitro, as I told you, what I feel is that Yitro was his other father. The father he never got to have, to learn with, to be with, to talk to discuss things. And he goes back to Yitro, and he tells him, let me go back to my king's folks in Egypt and see how they are faring, whether they are still alive. And Yitro said to Moshe, go in peace. כן? ויאמר לו, אלחנה וישב וישוב ויראה מאותם בחיים, ויאמר יתרו למשה, לך לשלום. Okay? What's happening here? What I feel here is that Moshe, the last thing that Moshe needs to do in order to obey God and to do the mission, to do the task, is to get permission, or at least a farewell, or birkat haderech, the blessing of the way, from Yitro, whom he spent with for at least 40 years. So he goes back to Yitro and he tells him, I need to go to see my brothers. I need to go to see my people in Egypt. I need to see if they're still alive and what's happening with them. And Yitro is giving him a blessing. Lech leshalom, go in peace. And when Moshe has the blessing of Yitro, he's going. Now, at this point, I would even dare to say that up till here, he feels closer to Yitro than to God, because up till now, God was this great power that revealed to him and told him to do this thing he didn't want to do. Okay, but Yitro is the person, it's the relationship, it's the love. And again, it might be not, not easy to say, but I really do feel that God is telling us through the story that God is happy when we establish close relationship with people, when we know how to be in love and in peace with other people. Then God is happy, because there's a limit to how we can be close to God because he's God. But he created people in his image, and that's what we have around us. And the way that we treat each other means that we know, we acknowledge that they were also created in the image of God. So God is not upset of Moshe for going back to Yitro and ask him, where she should go, and because he understands that's a necessity. Moshe really needs that. And only after Moshe goes to Yitro and gets his blessing, God continues to speak to Moshe. In other words, like God took a break, knowing that Moshe needs that affirmation from Yitro to go along to that mission. And only then God returns to Moshe and tells him, and God said to Moshe in Midian, go back to Egypt, for all those who sought to kill you are dead. And that's something very surprising. In other words, that's something that God leaves to the end. And it's as if God's saying, I think there's another thing that's bothering Moshe. And he's afraid because last when he left Mitzrayim, Pharaoh wanted to kill him. And he was a wanted person in the kingdom of Egypt. And God is saying, and you should know, it's like he's saying it in brackets. And by the way, Moshe, the people who wanted to kill you are dead. Who wanted to kill Moshe? Pharaoh. Now, for Moshe to hear that Pharaoh died, I would say it's quite ambiguous, because ambivalent, because that Pharaoh was the father of his mother, of his adopted mother, but that Pharaoh also turned his face to him and wanted to kill him. So this piece of information, it's true that it is said to Moshe, but it's also said to us as readers. There's something new happening. Something new is happening in the kingdom of Egypt. We already know that because we've been told that Pharaoh died and the people of Israel yelled to God, and then he remembered, and that's why he's talking to Moshe. But Moshe doesn't know it, and it's important for him to know it. And again, I think that the sensitivity of the Torah here, not to ask us to be superheroes or super not above nature heroes. No, we are human beings, we have fears, and the Torah wants to teach us how to overcome that fear. not to say we're not afraid, or not to say there's nothing to be afraid of, but to give us tools how to overcome that fear. And that's why it's important, because the Torah didn't have to add that sentence. Moshe never told God when they spoke at the snake, oh, and there's also people wanting to kill me at the desert, in Egypt. But God knew it's bothering him. And if it's bothered him, we should talk about it, because only if we talk about our fears can we deal with our fears. So he turns to Moshe and he says, and you shouldn't worry, the people died. Now we're entering, I'm specifically using the word entering because we're entering hold on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the most bizarre verses in the entire Torah. Very, very, very enigmatic. There are so many perushim about those psukim, like really, like endless. Like every parshan sees it in a different way, and it starts already in the midrashim. And but they have a lot to say. So let's see. Okay, so God is telling Moshe, they're dying. You can go. They're all dead. You can go back. ויקח משה את אשתו ואת בניו. So Moses took his wife and sons and mounted them on the ass and went back to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the rod of God with him. Okay? Very informational. You know, Moshe goes back to Mitzrayim. Of course, he's taking his family, because he doesn't know how long he's going to be in Mitzrayim to take them out, to take the people out of Egypt. He takes his wife and his sons. Now, sons, nachon, we heard about one son, Gershom, and here it says that they're two sons, and he puts them on the donkey, and they're going back to Egypt. And also he takes the rod, right? You know, because this is not just a field trip to Egypt, this is a mission, you know, and he's taking the staff with him. Now, and they're starting their way. The way that the Torah tells it is Vayashov Arza Mitzrayim. It is as if they already got to Mitzrayim. Nachon, this is how it's Vayashov Arza Mitzrayim, and they went back to the land of Egypt. But the continuing of the story tells us that they're not in Egypt yet. They're still on the way. And only when they're on the way heading towards Mitzrayim, God is adding something else to Moshe, and he's telling him, and God said to Moshe, when you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the marvelous that I've put within your power. I, however, will stiffen his heart so that he will not let the people go. Now, this is a surprise. God didn't tell Moshe at the bush that he's going to send him to redeem the people and talk to Pharaoh, but Pharaoh is not going to listen to him. And now, after he packed everything and is on his way to go to Mitzrayim, God is telling him, and by the way, he's not going to listen to you. Oh, thank you. So what am I supposed to do? It doesn't say yet, but listen to this element. When you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the marvelous that I've put within your power. Not only the things that God showed him how to do with a staff. Even Moshe doesn't know what's within his power. But God is telling him, what you saw till now is nothing. There's more in your power to do. And again, that's one of the things that, you know, if we look at it as a child growing up, the people of Israel growing up in the desert, we will have to learn that there's more into us than we see, than we believe, than we think. And the more we do, the more we grow, and the more we found out that we can do more. And here Moshe thinking to himself, oh yeah, I have 3 signs. I have the stick with the snake, I have the hand, and I have the water with the blood. That's great. And all of a sudden, God is telling him, "Oh, you saw nothing. I have put within your power. You will do before Paro, not even things that he doesn't even know. We know that he's doing more signs in front of Paro, but he doesn't know it yet. But the big surprise is, ואני אחזק את ליבו, and I will stiffen his heart so that he will not let the people go. ואמרת אל פרעה, and this is what you should tell him. When he'll say he doesn't want to send the people of Israel, then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says God, Israel is my firstborn son. Now, these words are very, very important. And I just want you to hear that even before Moshe gets to Mitzrayim and we start with the 10 plagues, the whole plan is there. The whole plan is there in front of us. There'll be more things, and Pharaoh will say no, and there'll be something about the firstborn. You dared to mess with my firstborn Israel, then I have said to you, let my son go that he may worship me, yet you refuse to let him go. Now I will slay your firstborn son. ואומר אליך שלח את בני ויעבדני ותמאן לשולחו, הנה אנוכי הורג את בנך בכורך. The whole thing is here. It sounds here. I'll say it bluntly, okay? But we'll say it next week. We'll say it in a soft way. But it sounds here like this is like kind of a revenge. You hardened your heart towards my son. I will take revenge over your son. And the entire plan with a focus on Bni Bechori Israel, and you refusing to send my son, I will kill your first son, is going to be there all the time. Now, sometimes when we read the Aseret HaMakot, we forget that it's been there before. The end of the story is already there before Moshe enters Mitzrayim. And there's something to do about the firstborn. And it's the first place in the entire, in sefer Bereshit וכמובן Shemot, that God is calling the people of Israel my firstborn. Now, what does that mean? Does it entitle us with more, with rights? Are we the first nation? We are not the first nation. There are nations even before us. But the people that God is choosing to do his mission, like God chose Moshe to do a mission. And there's rights that are just for us, and what's with the other people after. And when God is telling Moshe, you should tell Paro, the reason I kill your son is because you were cruel to my sons. And we ask ourselves, what's going on? Why is this revenge? Why not just let them out? Why hurt the people of Egypt or the children of Pharaoh or whoever is going to get hurt in Mitzrayim? And I just don't want to leave you with this gloomy ending, but I just want to say that we know today, because of archaeology and history, we know so much about Egyptian culture, ancient Egyptian culture, and that's going to be part of it. In other words, in understanding that the conflict or the battle between God and the Pharaoh is a religious battle. And what God is doing through the story of Mitzrayim is actually something for the rest of the world, the rest of the pagan world, let's call it, of making sure everyone understands that there's a new teaching around. And Mitzrayim specifically was chosen to get hit because Egypt was the strongest, the most ancient empire in the entire ancient world. They were there for thousands of years, and they believed that the pharaohs were the gods, and they believed in hierarchies. They believed that because they were the son of the god, they're important and the rest of the people are not important. And they, you know, killed, we talked about the pyramids, etc., etc. In other words, to break Egypt is to make the point about the new idea that the Torah is bringing into the world. And the way that Pharaoh treated the people of Israel in slavery and in injustice, in unmerciful way, this is exactly what the Torah is fighting against. There's a way to treat people even if they work for you, and Pharaoh doesn't know how to do that. And it's as if God is hurting him in a place where we think it'll hurt him, but we'll find that it didn't really hurt him, because he was willing to sacrifice even the life of his people, but not to say that he was wrong, which is another thing that Torah wants to teach us. Okay, I'll stop here, and the enigmatic words, sentences, phrases, verses will be next week. שבוע טוב.
שבוע טוב.
שבוע טוב, תודה רבה. תודה רבה.
תודה רבה.
תודה.
רבה.
שבוע טוב.
שבוע טוב.
תודה רבה, כל טוב.
ביי.